Welcome back to another Regulation G restricted Pokemon guide on the channel, and today we are going to be looking at Lunala. And Lunala is one of those Pokemon that, once again, when the format was first announced, got a lot of hype. Everybody was like, yo, Lunala is going to be really, really good. It gets access to stuff like Wide Guard. It hits pretty hard. You know, it's a very strong mon. It now gets access to the ability to Terra. I'll touch upon all that in a second, but what I'm getting at here is it really hasn't done much. Its fair share of usage early on, but it's really fallen off. And today what we're going to talk about, of course, is what Lunala is, how you kind of utilize it, break down some of the sets, and honestly I really want to touch upon where it is, because it is a good Pokemon, right? It has the stats of a very good Pokemon. It has moves of a very good Pokemon, and it has an ability of a very good Pokemon. It is just not really seen all that much right now, so I really want to talk about my thoughts on where it is, as well as give you guys some ideas on how you may want to utilize it in Regulation G and beyond. So we're gonna start like I said, with that busted ability in Shadow Shield, and this is going to make you take 50% from damage when you are at full HP, which is a really, really strong ability. You can actually work yourself into an EV spread where all of a sudden you are living Wicked Blows from Dark Urshifu, which you really shouldn't have to do, but the fact that you absolutely can do it is kind of insane, right? You live Astro Barrage from Calyrex, or at least one of them if you are at full health, right? There's a lot of good things you can survive here with that ability, and it's just really, really strong general bulk as well. And if you pair this with the likes of a Trick Room, this now gives you access to a really bulky Trick Room setter that they are going to have to double into to take down, and probably have to double into with single target attacks as well. Now, if you pair this beside Redirection, if they double spread move, Lunala's not dying. Lunala also gets access to Wide Guard for more mind games if they want a double spread move. Right? There's a lot of strong options. It's a very strong supportive restricted that is really good in Trick Room, and then it can also do damage. Right? You get access to a 100/100 signature move in Moongeist Beam that does ignore abilities. So this was very relevant back in the day when you were like ignoring the disguise of Mimikyu and you would just go right through it and knock it out. That was one of the biggest ups back then. Nowadays we don't have too many abilities you really want to ignore with the Moongeist Beam, but it's a nice little added effect for some general purposes here and there. And then you get the likes of not Cosmic Power. I mean, you do get it, but like I was gonna go with Meteor Beam. As one of the moves that you probably get. You're able to remove Incineroars from the field, right, as soon as you want. You can pair this with a Power Herb. That's going to be set 1. We'll get into that in a second. But you also get some other cool options, right? You get access to stuff like Calm Mind, Expanding Force. I guess Heat Wave is kind of cool depending on how the meta shapes up. Not as crazy hyper cool as what I would consider hyper cool on this Pokemon, but it's an option for you. You get stuff like obviously your Psychics. You get Moonblast as well. You get Tailwind if you wanted to go for Tailwind support instead of Trick Room. You also get access to Will-O-Wisp, which I didn't even know you got access to Will-O-Wisp. I just kind of found that out while I was trying to build some sets for this guide, and it's kind of cool, right? So you also get the ability to Terra. So now you are a Pokemon with basically multi-scale ability with incredible stats and the ability to Terra out of your 4x weaknesses. Very similar to that Calyrex Shadow, you are Terraing out of those weaknesses. And I still really, really like the concept of Terra Fairy on a Lunala. In this format, it makes a lot of sense. You completely flip the type chart on those dark type attacks. You become neutral to those ghost type attacks that would otherwise be 4x weakened to you. And Fairy is just a very good defensive Terra type in general. But let's just jump into set 1. And like I said, guys, it's going to be that Power Herb set. And what you really want to do with this Lunala is meant to be that supportive piece, but also be able to do damage. So you have the Meteor Beam to get your attack stat up while doing damage in the meantime, right? You're going to get that Meteor Beam off. More likely than not, you're going to be trying to drop this into an Incineroar. However, you can drop it into other Pokemon where you just simply need to get your special attack up so you can knock something out on the next turn with a Moongeist Beam. So it's very good utility at that, but it also serves the main purpose of removing Incineroar from the field, which feels incredible to me. And then, like I said, just the busted Moongeist Beam, you get to support yourself with Trick Room, you support the rest of your team with Trick Room. And then I really do like Wide Guard on Lunala. I would love to fit Protect or a Moonblast on this set. However, I don't know if you can in this metagame. There is a lot of Pokemon right now that are either clicking Snarl, they are clicking Astral Barrage, Precipice Blades, Origin Pulse, Water Spout, the Terrapagos, right? I don't think I need to continue with the amount of spread moves that are in this format right now. Wide Guard is very, very valuable. Once again, you do not need it. You can drop it. You do not need Wide Guard, but it's an option there if you are thinking about it. I really do like it on this set, or at least earlier on in the format when I was running this set. Like, it's a strong option. I don't know if it's a requirement in the format, but it's cool, right? Then you just go Terra Fairy, you get to be bulky, and you kind of just get to sit there. The main problem with Lunala, though, is like I just said, you just kind of sit there, right? Before you get the +1, yeah, you have a 137 attack stat. You're doing damage, but it's not nearly as much damage as some of the other restricteds. So it just feels like your restricted is reliant on now getting a Meteor Beam off, and sometimes just relying on Meteor Beam to connect as well, which you never really like. It just feels like you should be using a different restricted outside of Lunala, and you can kind of accomplish the same thing. Now, granted, I think Lunala is going to be amazing once we get a second restricted option, and mainly I say that because you can still have, then you can have a Lunala and a Pokemon that actually is still that heavy hitter as your other restricted. You are not wasting your restricted or your one restricted slot on what I would consider a supportive restricted, right? Lunala is that supportive restricted, right? You want to be utilizing that Trick Room. You want to be utilizing that Wide Guard, right? And then you want to be able to throw off a Meteor Beam when you can. You want to be able to utilize a Moongeist Beam, right? But you don't need to do these. If you're trying to do these on a consistent basis, there's going to be times where Lunala just doesn't do that because it tends to be more beneficial when it's built supportively, as you can see with the set that I have right here. Now, granted, you could obviously just try to send 252, 252 and do massive damage. There's probably nothing wrong with that either. But for the set I'm going to recommend, I have my special attack at 100. That is the first bump. No, it's the second bump. The first bump will be 20. It's the second bump in special attack, and more importantly, it is allowing you to get to +1 and then one-shot the Calyrex Ices. That is the benchmark I hit on this special attack. I didn't really see a need to click more or put more into that. I really wanted to showcase how bulky Lunala could be with this one set, and I think this set does that precisely. I initially built the set for something, I believe it was like 4 and an 84 special defense, and that was living Fluttermane, Shadow Balls, but then it ended up getting squashed when I had to add more to HP anyway. So it's still a calc, you do still live them, but there's technically no real correct investment or exact calc that this special defense HP investment is for. The HP and defense is actually for Wicked Blow from Urshifu. As I have mentioned earlier, it is a very strong option to do. You get to kind of prank them in the end game. Now granted, you can't really hit them back. However, if you do get them low enough and then you play to an endgame where they think they have you because they can just one-shot you with a Wicked Blow, and then all of a sudden you live and you drop their low HP Urshifu with a Moongeist Beam. Because Moongeist Beam is still doing like 40% to an Urshifu. It's still doing a good chunk of damage despite Urshifu resisting it, because your special attack is just so high that you're putting on a lot of pressure. So you can afford to just say, you know what, I can take one and I can Moongeist Beam it back. You also have Terra Fairy, which allows you to completely wall out those Dark Urshifus, which once again, Dark Urshifu, it's kind of disappeared. They're still somewhat around, as with most of the Urshifus. They're around, but they're not realistically there, right? Right now, the format, you're seeing a lot of Calyrex Shadow. We're seeing a lot of just Terrapagos as well, which is a big issue for Lunala. Terrapagos is an issue for the Calyrex Shadow. Terrapagos is, of course, going to be an issue for this Lunala. There's not much you can really do with it. Once again, though, what Lunala has versus Terrapagos is Wide Guard. And I'm sitting on the field with my restricted, clicking Wide Guard. It just kind of feels a little suboptimal. Now, granted, if I'm sitting on the field clicking Wide Guard with my restricted beside another restricted, right, I think that has a lot of potential moving forward. However, I think just as it's sole restricted, it's a little bit too supportive of a piece to really fully capitalize on what it wants to do in Regulation G, which without being a little bit more suboptimal. Now, granted, it's still really strong. You can still see success with it. If you want to play Lunala, by all means, go for it. You may just have to work a tad bit harder to try and accomplish some of the same things you would do with maybe a little bit of a better restricted, but it is still a very strong option. Moving on to set 2. Now, I was kind of grasping at straws with this one, and like I said, I think you really do truly benefit and have the best Lunala set if you are running a combination of Trick Room or Wide Guard, or at least one of them. However, in a format where you're really trying to put on more pressure, and if you want to be that restricted, that puts on more pressure, this is a very interesting way to go about doing that. You say, I no longer need Power Beam, Meteor Beam, because you're going to opt for Calm Mind as the way to boost your special attack stat. I think this is a cool kind of concept that I haven't really explored, but could be something as well. Now, right, you run Calm Mind, you get your special attack boost up. You also get a special defense boost here as well, which is really, really nice. You can run Safety Goggles. You can go Leftovers. There's a lot of options for this set. You could go Citrus Berry as well. I'm not as big of a fan of that one, but there are options on this spread for you to go with, right? And I think the concept here was just the fact that Calm Mind setup works for Terapagos. Maybe Calm Mind setup works for Lunala, right? Like, this was the support of Lunala. What if we had Lunala be that threat, be that setup piece on the team? It is in concept, in theory, actually very, very strong. But once again, are you just getting something that you could get from perhaps a little bit of a better restricted? Maybe you just, is Nasty Plot Calyrex just better than Lunala in a single restricted format? Probably. Is Calm Mind Terapagos? If you're going to approach the Calm Mind route, why not have a Calm Minder that actually just beats Calyrex naturally in Terapagos, right? I just feel like any set that I try to come up with for this Pokemon is either too passive as your single restricted user like set 1, or it ends up being a little bit just a suboptimal version of a different restricted, right? It just kind of feels along those lines. And once again, I didn't really do much on the spread here. There's nothing crazy. Once again, I kept my special attack so that at +1, I'm dropping those Calyrex Ices. I put a little bit more speed just to try and outpace some things. This will always outpace those max speed Incineroars. Not that I've seen any running around, but it's something to consider. You also have to consider the fact that 140-188 is also, once again, going to live that Wicked Blow. A little bit of a useless calc here because, once again, you are clicking Terra Fairy in front of that more often than not, and it's probably not very big in the metagame right now, but it's still a very intriguing option to try to utilize and try to, once again, have that option to just say, you know what? I don't have to tear this piece if I don't want to. If I'm okay taking 90% just to take a trade-off, I can go ahead and take 90%, take my trade-off, and then come back in later and maybe either go, you know what I mean? I can come back in later and do some damage, or I can just say, you know what? I can save my Terra for a different Pokemon. I didn't need to waste it on my Lunala. Some other cool things you do get, which is just what set 3 is going to be, guys. I didn't really showcase a lot, right? And there's not much else. These first two sets are pretty much the two that are the only two that I see really doing well. There's, of course, you got the Expanding Force. I'm not a Psy Spam player, guys, but some Psy Spam player might be trying Lunala plus Indeedee plus like an Ursaluna variant. I could definitely see something like that doing well if it got the right matchups in a tournament. I could definitely see that. So Expanding Force is kind of cool when you're pairing it with the likes of Indeedee. I do want to talk about Terra Normal as well. You are completely flipping that type chart on that Calyrex now. That Calyrex can no longer hit you at all, which is very, very unique. I think it's a very cool option. However, I do think Fairy is a lot more consistent. Like I said earlier, Will-O-Wisp does wonders in this format. But once again, in Regulation G, if I'm using my restricted Pokemon as a supportive piece, it feels like I could just have a different supportive piece and a more offensive restricted, or it's better utilized in a dual restricted format where one of my restricted can lean towards the supportive role a little bit better. Wide Guard, once again, we've already talked about that. That move is broken in this format. It's really, really good. If you don't want to go Trick Room, you can go Tailwind. You can get some cool stuff done there. We talked about Moonblast. I think we covered most of what Lunala can do, guys. Once again, I do believe Fairy is either set 1 or set 2, probably leaning towards like a Leftovers here. That way, if you get chipped down a little bit, you can actually start slowly healing back up to full. Like versus like some of those frailer, just those pieces that are meant to chip you, right? Like a Grassy Glide from a Rillaboom, right? That they try to break your Shadow Shield with. You can have that Leftovers, you can heal it back now. There's a lot of options here. I think the options are cool. The EVs that I do have on this set 3 here, I wanted to showcase that you can live Life Orb, Astral Barrage from a Calyrex Shadow, and that's what these do. However, these sets, they're much more equipped, like especially the Calm Mind one, it's built to want the physical bulk, because I'm going to get the +1 on the special defense side regardless once I get a Calm Mind up. Now, granted, you're not always going to have a Calm Mind up, but I think you benefit from the physical bulk a lot more than a set like this. But I did still want to showcase that, hey, you can build this thing to survive Life Orb, Astral Barrage from a Calyrex, right? Then you probably close this out just once again, just 100, right? That's the benchmark I like to hit on the special attack. You can do whatever you really want with speed. There's not a lot going on right there. I know there's a lot of talk about it, right? 119 is a very good stat to hit, right? 121 is cool as well. These are all popular numbers that these players will hit, right? So 119, 121. Then you got 123, I believe, is max speed instant. Like I said, it's not really relevant. But once again, you can play a little bit more, right? Maybe you go a little bit higher. Right, I don't think you need to go as high as 131. Once again, I still think you're better suited as that trick room piece, but you can play around with this. You can play around with your defense, right? But I would take set 1 or 2 if you are trying to utilize Lunala in this format right now. That is how I would approach this. But with that, guys, that's going to be it. I'm going to stop rambling about Lunala right now. I would personally start with set 1 and adapt from there if you are going to take this piece. But with that, if you guys do enjoy these types of guides, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. It really does help with the channel. And of course, I really do appreciate it. But with that, I'm going to get on out of here, and I will catch you all in a future video.